Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 750,000 times in over 150 countries and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Poolua country in Tasmania. In today's episode 240, we bring you the first of two episodes of on-trail recordings and interviews from my recent Tasmanian-based South Coast track trip. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published, and if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. In this episode, we bring you the first half of my recent trip on the Tasmanian South Coast track. This includes my travel day from Canberra through to Hobart and then the first 3 days on trail, which did change slightly. So if you've listened to last week's episode, you'll know that I planned to do this walk over 5 days, and overall I ended up doing 7 days of walking. So if you listen to this episode and next episode, you'll understand why there were some changes in that scheduling. It's 6:08 on Thursday, the 8th of December, and I'm just here in Hobart. I've just had my dinner. I flew down this morning from Canberra through to Hobart, and it's a day earlier than my flight to Melaleuca tomorrow. Potentially, I could have actually caught a flight tomorrow, landed roughly around about 12:30, and then had a 45-minute stopover before I needed to check into the flight to Melaleuca. But given what's been going on in the aviation industry in Australia at the moment, I wasn't game to rely on the flight not being cancelled or there being an issue and missing my flight down to Melaleuca. So I thought it was safer to turn up the day before. And in all honesty, it's been pretty good. So I'm staying with relatives here at the moment in Hobart. And I just had my dinner, and I'm just sitting here looking out over the harbour. Some spectacular views. So far, so good for tomorrow. I got a reminder to say my flight to Melaleuca was on, and I needed to check in by a certain time. And I think check-in time was by around about 1:15 or 1:45 for the flight at 2:15. And that gets me into Melaleuca at roughly around about 3:15, 3:30. I'm going to have a look and see what the options and alternatives are. You know, it's, as I said, it's past 6 o'clock. It's really light, and given that we're in the southern part of Australia and we've still got another couple of 100 kilometres to go, 120 kilometres to go to Melaleuca, the days are going to be longer and there's going to be a lot of light. So potentially I could actually walk 10 kilometres tomorrow afternoon. That's probably 2.5 hours. And that's quite reasonable given that it'd get me into a campsite if there is one in that sort of distance. And that's what I've got to check tonight. So I'll see how I go. Flight down was pretty good. We were supposed to arrive at 12:15. We ended up arriving probably about 40 minutes late. Apparently we had 100 kilometre-hour winds all the way down, so that certainly slowed us down. But there wasn't a lot of turbulence, so it was a pretty smooth sort of flight. Tonight, my task is to go through and pull my bags apart. I'll be leaving my travelling clothes and my airline bag here at the relative's house. And I'll get my pack all sorted out. The only thing I won't be doing is filling up my water bladder. It doesn't particularly work very well when you've got an unpressurised plane and with a water bladder. They tend to leak a bit. So I'll fill up my water down at Melaleuca tomorrow, as well as picking up my gas cylinder tomorrow at Melaleuca as well. Feeling reasonably comfortable and confident at the moment. Weather's actually quite nice, although when I did arrive in Hobart today, it was drizzling and it was quite cold. And looking at the forecast over the next 5 to 6 days, I am expecting rain probably all but one day. At least that's the forecast at the moment. And the nighttime temperatures are reasonably cool. Daytime temperatures, I think the hottest temperature that's forecast is 22. So reasonably pleasant temperature-wise. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, I'll just go and do my final pack and get sorted out. And in for a good night's sleep. It's 8:37 on Friday the 9th of December. I'm still here at my relative's house here in Hobart City, and I'm just waiting for a reasonable hour till just after 9 o'clock, and I just want to double check with the transport company that picks you up at Cockle Creek about a couple of logistical issues, but pretty much waiting around today until I get my flight down to Melaleuca. I want to be at the airport or the aerodrome at around about 1 o'clock, so that gives me a few hours to kill. One thing that I hadn't really thought about, or I had thought about but not in any serious way, was we are very south in relation to latitude. We're within 2 weeks of the summer solstice, and the days are long. And I was aware of this but didn't really think much about it. And getting here last night and staying in Hobart last night, it was fairly light at 9 o'clock and really only started to get lose light between sort of 9 to 9:30. I am one of these people that just can't, it drives me insane just hanging around. And as much as I like talking to other hikers, I don't feel like landing in at Melaleuca today and spending 5 or 6 hours until it gets dark, until I can go to bed. I'd rather be walking, and given that it's a distance of 13.4 kilometres from Melaleuca to the next campsite, I think it's not unrealistic that I can actually head there and do it quite comfortably. 13.4 kilometres. Even if I leave at 4:30, it'll get me there at 8:30 to Point Eric, and it's plenty of time. It's not a difficult sort of terrain. It's classed as easy to moderate, but I know it's not going to be a cruisy sort of thing, but it certainly will be easier than some of the days we've got coming up. So it's the sort of thing that, as I said, barring any changes in horrendous weather conditions, I'm likely to start walking this afternoon just to get a bit of a head start, which will take a bit of the pressure off over the next few days. So looking forward to it. The sun came out again fairly early this morning at around about 5 o'clock. So again, long days. And again, it was I tend to wake up around about, without an alarm, I'm waking up sort of 10 to 5. And that's inside a house and not in a tent. So I'm expecting to wake up the similar sorts of timing. And I don't sleep that well on the trail anyway. It's a fairly fitful sort of sleep. So I'm likely to be waking up at 5 o'clock over the next few days, having breakfast and packing and heading off. Typically I like to head off by about 7:30 on most days when I'm hiking. So that potentially gives me 12-hour days if that's what I want to do. And I don't necessarily want to do that, but it gives me plenty of time to meet my time frames, providing there's no issues along the way. Okay, I'm just going to go through and kill some time this morning, and next time I talk to you will be just before I board my flight to Melaleuca. It's 2:30 on Friday the 9th of November, and I'm here at the Par Avion Air Base at Cambridge Airport. I'm just waiting for our plane to turn up before we head off down to Melaleuca. For me, this was probably the biggest worry of the whole trip, about whether the flight would get cancelled due to bad weather. And potentially yesterday, if that had been the case, if it had been flying, that might have been the case, because we had strong winds. So I don't know whether their flights actually went through or not, or whether they were delayed. A few people inside ready to head down towards Melaleuca. So again, definitely not going to be alone on the track. Weather has very much changeable. I mean, they talk about Melbourne having 4 seasons in one day, but that's pretty much what we're getting here. Had a tiny bit of rain very early this morning, and it was sunny for most of the morning. had rain and a bit blowy, and now it's sort of back to being the sun's coming out and the clouds shifting away. So I know I'm not going to get 5 to 6 days with a clear, fine weather. It's just not the way it works in Tasmania. Gone through and checked in. Bag ended up being lighter than I thought. It ended up being 13 kilos. I've still got to add my gas cylinder and my water, which is I'll probably end up putting about 2 litres of water in. And now it's starting to rain again and the sun's fully out. So this is really good sort of day and good sort of weather. So it won't be overly heavy, and as I said, the plan is to head to the first campsite tonight, and it just seems a realistic thing to do given the amount of sunlight and the length of the days we're getting. So looking forward to it. Had a good lunch with the family and they dropped me off, and now we're just waiting for the plane, which is in roughly around about half an hour. Talk to you later. It's 4 o'clock. I'm here at Melaleuca Airfield. There was a bit of a problem with the planes today. The winds were apparently quite strong and slowed them down, so they ended up doing multiple flights in smaller planes. So we got here probably about half an hour later than originally planned, but otherwise quite good. It was a good flight, relatively smooth. Got a chance to see this track and the coastline on the way through. We did have a couple of small showers on the way through, but now it's actually fairly clear and, well, it's cloudy, but the rain stopped, which is a good thing. Got to fly over the track on the way in, and there definitely are some flooded sections where we will be getting some wet feet. There's just no option on that one. This is walking across an open, marshy sort of plain, so that was as expected. Just have a bit of a loo break here before I go. I need to fill up water. Given that I'm working 13.4 kilometres tonight, I'll probably only put about 2 litres in, maybe 1.5 litres, so I can top up my water when I get to camp tonight. Really looking forward to starting the walk. It was good seeing the coastline from the air and parts of the track we're going to be walking across. So I'll probably, by the time I'd finished doing some photos around here and filling up water and doing everything else, I'm guessing I'll leave at around about 4:30 this afternoon. Okay, I will catch up with you a bit later on this evening as I make my way along the track. It's 6:36 in the evening and it's very, very light, so still got about 2.5 hours worth of daylight left. And then it starts getting dark between 9 and 9:30. So far I've covered 6.9 kilometres in an hour and 36, and I'm more than halfway, so really another hour and 30 should pretty much do it, depending on how many breaks I take or how many times I stop to do podcasting. But I think realistically I'll just do this one. I'm probably at the high point of today, or give or take. I'm skirting around the bottom of the large hills behind me, or small mountains, depending on what you want to actually call them. And just spent the last hour and 36 going down the valley, coming across the open plains, and my dry socks lasted all of about 3 minutes. They got wet just after, probably about 50 metres after exiting the runway of the airport. Had a few times where I've been walking through water, and the mud's okay. It's bad in some sections, but nowhere near really bad. So the trail's pretty good. There's small boardwalk sections, areas of crushed rock, and at the moment I'm going over a hilly area, so I'm out of the low bottom of the valley, so the water's not so bad. Feeling okay so far. 7K's pretty good. Lovely countryside, weather's pretty good, have a tiny bit of drizzle here and there, but otherwise the sun's really nice. There's another group that's travelling similar sort of, or at least started today with me, and they're a group of, I think, 8, and they're planning on doing the trip in about 8 days, although they might take a bit longer than that. So apparently the forecasts for the Iron Ranges over the next couple of days is okay, but they were saying they were planning on taking slightly longer to get there, and realistically that meant for them with the weather conditions it was going to be really wet. And again, going up's not as bad, but coming down was a bit of a problem, being slippery. So they said they may speed up their pace to try and get through the walk a bit faster than they'd planned. It's 10:33. I'm here in my campsite at Point Eric, and I've been here since roughly 10 to 9. So I got here, set up my tent, got all my stuff inside, blew up my inflatable mat, got my sleeping bag out, and basically got my food all sorted. So after cooking food, having something to drink, I decided it was time to come into bed and just do a bit of catch up on podcasting and work out what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm really glad that I started today. I would have been sitting at Melaleuca for 5-6 hours, not really doing much. I put my sleeping bag out and would have basically had dinner and then just gone to bed really early. So this way I've covered 13.4 kilometres and everything's going well so far. So as I think I mentioned the last post or last recording, my dry socks lasted about 3 minutes. So within about 50 metres of leaving the runway, so I crossed from the little kiosk there where you sign in or sign out, cross the runway and head off. And within about 50 metres of going across the runway and heading up the roadway on starting my trip, I was basically ankle deep in water and there wasn't much I could do about it. And that was the pattern through the afternoon, on and off. I was getting puddles, mud. Mud wasn't too bad. I mean, when I compare it to the Great Ocean Walk, which Jill and I did in a few months ago in sort of August, September, I think the mud was worse. But I must admit, this is only the first day so far, so I could change my mind on this one. The walk itself, as I said earlier, was through along a valley through marshland, and then I started going up along the foothills, curving around the mountains, and then coming back down into the coastal area, and I actually came out onto the beach. And I knew I was coming out onto the beach, but it was a real surprise. It was like coming off boardwalk through some fairly dense scrub, and all of a sudden there was the beach. And I could hear it, but I just didn't have an indication I was about to walk along the beach. And I did that for roughly about 2.5 to 3 kilometres. Nice, hard, compact sand. The tide was fairly low. And again, this is one of these sort of things where you do need to check the tide. So if there's been heavy rain for long periods and there's a very high tide, it's not going to be deep, but it means, in my case, when I had one crossing on the middle of the beach, and I got to about ankle depth deep in water, and it was fairly fast moving as well. It might have made a bit of a difference had it have been 40 or 50 centimetres deeper. Getting into Point Eric campsite, there are a couple of other campsites. There was one just after the inlet crossing on the beach I could have stayed at. I think that suited about 3 tents, but I'd rather have done the extra couple of kilometres. And as I said, I got in around about 10 to 9. And by the time I got my tent set up, I was cooking in the dark, but I got my tent all up in daylight. Trying out my new Thermarest X-Therm sleeping mat for the first time tonight. Fairly easy to blow up with the new valve on it, the wing lock valve. So again, we'll see how we go on that one and see how it copes through the night. My old sleeping mat was roughly about 8 years old, and it was only staying up for about 2 hours, and I'd have to sort of blow it up almost every 2 hours. So I'm hoping this one will last all through the night. You probably can hear the beach in the background. Really, this campsite is probably, if I draw a straight line, it's probably only 40 metres from the beach, but it's raised up around about 6 or 7 metres. So, even in horrendously big seas coming in here, you're still going to be protected. Fresh water is roughly 400 or 500 metres further along the beach, and I've got enough to go through and do me tonight and tomorrow morning, and then start for the walk. And I will need to top up. Although again, there's a couple of options along the way. Almost 3 and 4 kilometres in, I can pick up water if necessary. But I think this is always one of the risks where it wasn't overly hot. I was drinking, but I probably wasn't drinking enough. And I think I've got to have to force myself to drink a bit more. So hopefully tomorrow I'll do that. Also got Louisa River, which is where I'm staying tomorrow night, which is 17 kilometres away. There's a campsite on either side of the river. And in all honesty, for the sake of 100 metres, I'm going to camp across the river. We had a couple of really light showers this afternoon. Not enough to put rain gear on, but something to keep an eye on. But I'd rather get across that river. And the only other water crossings, if you like, as I said, was the inlet along the beach and just wet pieces along the pathways. Bit of bird life, no animal life so far. And again, today was sort of cloudy and it was mild, but not really being hot or not cold either. So, it'd be interesting to see once I start walking. And I plan to start walking early-ish tomorrow morning, definitely by 8:30 at the latest, if not earlier than that. And again, given that it's light until sort of 9 o'clock, daylight's not a real issue. One thing I realised that tonight, finishing at 10 to 9, is the latest that I have ever hiked. And it wasn't daylight though. But yeah, normally I've been hiking at night time, but that's normally been about 6, 7 o'clock, and that's about it. So this part of the world, this time of the year, really light for long periods. So it's going to be very easy to keep on walking long periods if necessary. So at the moment I'm on track. I need now where I need to be to get me ready to pick up the return transport to Hobart on the 14th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, that's all for me. I will go to bed. Good morning. It's 7 o'clock on day 2 on the trail of the South Coast Track in Tasmania. Had a fairly good sleep last night for a number of reasons. One, by the time I went to actually bed, it was 10:40, so it was wasn't my typical long nights where I'm often in bed by sort of 6:37 at the latest, and then struggle to try and keep asleep for anything up to sort of 11 hours, which I just can't do. So, new sleeping mat, really happy with it. Only 1 day so far, but very comfortable. Stayed inflated the whole night, which is always a plus. And was nice and toasty and warm as well. You can probably hear the surf. I'm actually standing on the beach, which is really only 15, 18 metres from where the campsite is, and had pretty much the sound of the waves the whole night. Sea conditions are relatively flat. There's just a slight wave coming through. Tide is not high. It is actually going out, but it is high-ish, which is going to be interesting because I've got to cross around the base of a cliff, which can be a bit of an issue on high tide. So I'll see what happens with that. Point Eric has a toilet facility here. It's just a long drop, pretty typical. You do need to bring your own toilet paper. There is none, but that was pretty much expected, particularly in remote areas. I think a lot of people have the expectation that toilet paper will be in the toilets, but not the case, particularly in remote conditions like this track. We had a slight shower last night, only for a very short period, and that was probably just after I went to bed, so that worked well. And today the conditions are just a light cloud. There is sun. It's not going to be a sunny, clear day, but it's actually quite nice. I'll see what happens for the rest of the day. I'm expecting pretty much rain for most days, so if I don't get it, that's a bonus. This trip, I think, as I mentioned, I'm wearing gaiters, and it's just getting used to having them on. Every time you change shoes, there's a different sort of fit that you've got to try and work with. I'm wearing with trail runners. They work quite well. Kept me, not that I was walking through deep mud yesterday, but they kept me reasonably clean. I've put on wet runners this morning and relatively wet socks, given that I'm likely, in fact, even I think I've got 100 metres and I'm crossing a small inlet, not particularly deep, but I'm likely to get wet shoes. And again, that's just going to be a pattern through the day. So even though I've got 2 pairs of dry socks, I'll see what happens later today if I can dry these ones out a bit more. Okay, I will talk to you later on. Good morning. Saturday the 10th. It's time-wise is 9:03. I've been going for an hour and 47 minutes and I've done 5.41 kilometres, which is actually slower than yesterday. And partly that's because I spent 15 minutes just collecting water and topping my water up, but also the terrain is a bit different, it's a bit harder. It's funny, walking along the beach, and there was in the guidebook that says you've got to go around a headland at low tide. That's now been replaced with a track that goes over the top of the hill and connects you back with the beach again. Very overgrown, but so that slows you down as well, but it was good. Another beach walk, and then another short inlet crossing, only ankle deep, but I did get wet feet, and then back inland again. And heading up a hill today, and this is the highest hill I think we've got. It's about 250, 260 metres, and I can see it, and there's this track that just goes bloody straight up a spine. So we're making our way, I'm making our way towards that area now. A lot more boardwalk than I thought there'd be, and this is a combination of timber boardwalk and the mesh. I think they're sort of progressively adding the mesh in where they can. And it was funny, I was thinking, geez, there's not much mud. I was expecting a lot more mud. And then as soon as I thought that, sure enough, there were sections of mud, but not like what I've seen in photos in years gone past. And again, it's still only early. This is only the second day, but I can see where the trail was and the boardwalks replaced. And it would have been very muddy and wet and boggy if I had to go through the natural ground. Weather's good, sort of slightly overcast, sort of a light cloud cover. It doesn't look like it's going to rain, but again, who knows? It'll probably change in another few hours. But it's quite pleasant sort of temperature to walk in. And I'm just sitting here on one of the boardwalks, just with my feet off in a nice dry patch. And there's the other group that I'm sort of travelling with, or travelling at the same sort of time with. They've got some younger teenage and early 20-year-old kids, and they just rocket along, which is understandable. So, it's 17 kilometres today, so I think, again, the slow bit will be going up over this mountain and then down again and then back into the straight again, or the lower parts again, so see how we go. Be interesting to see what we do time-wise, but I think 13 kilometres yesterday in roughly 3.5 hours. I think tomorrow or today is going to be a lot different. I think it'll be a slower going and it'll take me longer. But I've started at 7:15, which is good for me. I'd like to get away by 7:30, and I've got plenty of time. That's not an issue today to get to the campground just on the other side of the Louisa River. Talk to you later. It's 10:18. I've been going for just on 3 hours, and I've done 7.48 kilometres. Much lower pace than yesterday. Yesterday I was averaging about 4.6 kilometres an hour, but I've pretty much had, for the last hour, a climb up 246 metres, which is not a big climb by any means, but it's a steep climb. And the track's pretty narrow. For people with size 15 feet, it's hard to place the feet sometimes. And I'm still amazed that on an uphill trip like this, there's still mud. So I'm at the high point just now. There's a couple of good level bits of ground that are dry, so I'm sitting here. And then I'll head back down towards the coastline, which is pretty much where I'm going for the rest of the day. It's down or on flattish sort of area. I've got 10.1 kilometres still to go to the Louisa River campsite. On the other side of the river, there's one each side, but I'll camp on the other side. And then I've got the Iron Ranges tomorrow, which is the really steep one, which is about 4 times the altitude of what I'm doing here, or roughly at least anyway. Still a nice day, the weather's good. Again, not hot, which is quite nice. I don't know what the temperature is, but I think it's probably around about 14 degrees, and it's really pleasant to walk. There's a light cloud. It doesn't look like there's anything that's going to bring any rain, but again, as I said, another 3-4 hours, see what happens. Okay, I'll just have a little rest and I'll keep on going. It's 11:55. It's lunchtime. I've just crossed Louisa Creek twice. So the image in the guidebook that shows walkers crossing the creek, going down a little sort of set of wooden stairs and having a rope going across was pretty much true to form. What I didn't realise, there was two creeks fairly close to each other. So we crossed one, walked about approximately 700, 800 metres, and then there was another one. And this is where we're sitting having lunch at the other side. So far, it's been 4 hours and 39 minutes and done 11.3 kilometres. So still got around about 6 kilometres left to go. And we've still got another crossing to go, which is the Louisa River. Definitely slow going. Weather's held up, although it's starting to get a bit warmer now. So I don't know what the temperature is, but it feels a bit warmer. So it'll be interesting to see what it is when I check later on today. Okay, lunchtime. Good afternoon. It's 4:24 on Saturday the 10th of December, and I'm here at Louisa River Campground. Now, there's actually two campgrounds at Louisa River, one on each side of the river, and I must admit, unless it's really busy, it's a better option to camp on the Ironbound Range side rather than the other side, mainly because you don't want to do a river crossing and get wet feet first thing in the morning. This walk today took roughly around about 8 hours. And again, it was roughly about 18, tiny bit over 18 kilometres. And really 2 kilometres an hour is probably what I was averaging, mainly because it was ups and downs. The down pieces sometimes were quite steep, and the stairs were quite steep as well. So you were having to go down sideways on some of them, just to there's just no option to go down forward because the stairs, or what you class as stairs, are so narrow, they're designed to go sideways. So this morning I went over Red Point Hills, and that was around about 235 metres in altitude. Not a big mountain by any means, or big hill by any means, but it just, just steep. So it just took a while. After we had lunch, and again, lunch was after the second creek crossing earlier on today, and again, I had probably a half-hour lunch, which for me is a long time. Coming into Louisa River, it was a river rather than a creek. Wasn't overly deep. Just looking at my wet pants, it's just below knee level, probably to high calf, and there was a rope there, and the rope was to provide you a bit of stability because the water was moving a bit fast. Once we got over to the campground, set up the tent, and that took me a little while because I was fiddling around. I now need to go and get water, and even though it's only roughly 4:30, it's going to be an early dinner, whereas last night it was dinner at 10:40. So tomorrow is probably the most difficult day of the whole trip, and this is climbing over the Ironbound Range, and the altitude ascent is roughly 900 metres, and it's 900 metres and it's steep. There's next stage, which is from the Louisa River Campground to Little Deadman's Bay, which is where I'll be camping tomorrow night. 12.3 kilometres, again, not a huge distance, but one of the other hikers made the comment, it's not the distance, it's the time. So to do the 12.3 kilometres tomorrow, suggested 6 to 9 hours. And I came across a hiker who was going the other direction than what we were. And she was saying she crossed the Ironbound Ranges yesterday, and the top of the Ironbound Range was whited out. And she said that wasn't particularly helpful when you're trying to get down and work out where you're going. It's going to be interesting tomorrow. I think it's going to be it definitely is going to be a physically very, very demanding sort of trip. Looking at the change in altitude, it's probably similar to one of the local hikes I'm used to, which is Mount Tennant. Again, same sort of altitude change, and fairly steep and lots of stairs. So this is something I'm used to, but looking at the mountain as I was coming into Louisa Campground you think, okay, I can see where I'm going tomorrow, and it's steep in some sections. First half of the mountain's not too bad. The last half, it's going to be a steep, almost a bit of a scramble across a grassy area. So see how it goes. Today the weather held out, no rain as yet, so we can still got time to get that. But I'm set up and I'm ready to go, and I will be going to bed much earlier today than I did last night. So I think pretty much I'll be in bed by 7 o'clock at the latest. Okay, I will talk to you tomorrow morning. All right, so we're here at the campground just below the Ironbound Ranges at Louisa River. And there's apart from myself, there's a group of 9 people. So as I wasn't sure what was going to happen before this trip, I was either going to see somebody or nobody. And given the flights were all booked out, I thought I was going to see someone along the trail. And I actually came across somebody who was travelling the other direction yesterday. So, it's not as if you're going to be by yourself. So we've just got a couple of hikers we're going to have a chat to, so I'll get them to introduce themselves and I'll talk to them about how they're finding the trip.
Yeah, hi, my name's Nigel, age 51, so I'm actually leading this party of 9 people, that's pretty much, we've started same time as you, Tim, and probably looking to exit or finish the walk a little bit later than you. We were going to stay at Louisa Bay last night, but the weather's looking very promising for getting over the Ironbounds today, so we've jumped ahead a little bit.
Okay, and what made you decide to do this trip?
This is one of those bucket list trips for me. There's been a lot of talk prior to COVID about them putting huts along this track, so we really wanted to do it while it was pretty much a true wilderness hike.
Okay, and you're in a group of 9. How did you work that out?
We put out the call about 6 months ago to see, about 12 months ago to see who was interested, and the Grampians Peaks Trail opened up in December last year, so we decided to do that before this one. It's just a case of putting the word out, and I'm involved with Scouts, so we've got a few rovers here, we've got a few venturers here, and a couple of mates as well. Okay.
How are you finding the track so far?
It's a lot easier than what I expected, to be honest. But I think that's probably the conditions. I mean, we had a little bit of rain on the first day. Yesterday was dry. The track's fast, a lot faster than what I expected, and I think that's because of the work that was done a few years back with the new boards, duck boards, and that sort of thing that they've put in.
Yeah, I can imagine if the board works weren't there, I can really get a wet day or two, and I can imagine what it would look like.
Yeah, that section from Boy Creek up to Red Point Hills yesterday. Without the boardwalks, that would be an extra 2 hours, I reckon, to try and trudge your way through that mud. So the parks have done an excellent job in terms of putting in a little bit of infrastructure to create a more sort of environmentally sensitive situation. If you've got tired legs, those duck boards, even though they're a little bit slippery at the moment, they're greatly appreciated rather than stepping into a knee-deep bog.
All right, that's great. Thanks very much. Okay, so again, still at Louisa River Campground, and we've got our second person we're talking to, so I'll get them to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Tom, 17.
All right, and you're part of the group of 9?
Yeah.
All right, so you're doing this with your dad and with friends and a number of you are scouts or into scouting?
Yeah.
Now, why did you want to do this trip?
I haven't actually done a lot of hiking down in Tassie, so we did the overland a couple of years ago, but other than that, not really much. So it's definitely very different to Victoria, so I wanted to kind of get that experience, and especially coastal hiking. It's very, very different. It's quite wet, so it's been a lot of fun, yeah.
And what's been the highlight? It's only been a couple of days, but what's been the highlight so far?
Oh, probably I think Louisa Bay was like very, very pretty. Yeah, going down there and just sort of like you basically go down this little cliff and then it's kind of this like wide open expanse of beach and there's cave systems and everything. It's just, I don't know, it's pretty marvelous actually. Yeah.
And that was an off trail section, wasn't it?
Yeah, so yeah, it was like an off-trail section that led to like a little campsite on the beach, which I think you're able to camp at as an option. But yeah, we just did it as a sidewalk and then kept going straight through.
And how long did it take you to get down and then back onto trail again?
So it's about 3Ks there and then 3Ks back. So it took us, I would say probably about an hour, because obviously we are not full pack, so it was a bit quicker than it would have otherwise been, yeah.
All right, that's great. And what's been the low light so far of the trip?
The first climb was sort of deceptively hard. Like it's not, you don't feel like it's going to be super challenging, but then you're sort of halfway through and you're like, oh, this is a bit of a leg burner. I'm starting to kind of work, so it's actually been pretty good. So I guess it's a low light, but it's sort of, in the midst of a lot of highlights, I guess you could say. Yeah.
All right. That's great. Okay. Well, we'll see you during the daytime. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good morning. It's Sunday the 11th of December. I'm here at the Louisa River Campground, which you may just be able to hear in the background. And I'm pretty much packed up and getting ready to summit the Ironbound Ranges today. And this certainly will be the hardest day as far as ascents and descents. Took some photos yesterday which don't really do this justice. It's just a steep 900-metre ascent and then a descent down on the other side. And as hard as the ascent's going to be, it looks reasonably clean, whereas apparently down the other side it's pretty messy and muddy. So it's going to be an interesting day today. Recommendation is around about 6 to 9 hours it's going to take, and then the plan is to camp at Deadman's Campground just on the other side. So it's about just a bit over 12 kilometres. So distance is not big, but again, it's one of those days where realistically, if I leave at sort of by 7 o'clock, it's probably going to take till mid to late afternoon to get in. Weather's looking okay. Bit more cloud today. I can still see a bit of blue sky, but it's pretty much been covered, and I think there is forecast for showers today. So hopefully we'll be able to get over the worst of it before things start coming through. Had a bit of a fitful sleep last night, mainly because I was in bed by about 6:30, 7 o'clock. I was never going to sleep that long. But I did manage to sleep through what I think was a bush rat stealing stuff from outside the tent. So I left my stove standing up with some water in it, which got knocked over. I had my rubbish bag taken a couple of metres away, which I managed to retrieve and been eaten. What this little creature did was steal my spoon. I should know better because bush rats seem to like the taste or the texture of that plasticky material. So spoon's gone, and thankfully the group that was here had a spare, and they've provided me with one to use, which I'm really appreciative of. So yeah, I will just finish my last little bit of packing and probably head off in the next 10 minutes or so. It's 8:08. I have been travelling for an hour and 32 minutes and I've done 1.94 kilometres. So yeah, it's slow going. When you look at the Ironbound Ranges, you can see there's a shoulder, and then you head on towards the main peak itself. And I'm just up at the top of the shoulder at the moment, making my way along that. And I can now see the trail up to the next ridge and then up to the summit itself. So it's a logical sort of route, but it is slow going. And again, the stairs, some of them are pretty steep. Having a bit of extra height helps. But yeah, it's not a fast track going up and down. So even though it's 12 kilometres for the day, it's normally recommended somewhere up to about 6 to 9 hours in travelling, which I can understand. Views are spectacular. They really are. Looking down towards Louisa Bay, where some of the other group went to yesterday, it looks like a spectacular little bay. And the ocean's pretty flat. There's just some surf rolling in right at the beach, but otherwise the ocean is dead flat pretty much. Blue sky, bit of light clouds, so it's not stinging sort of sun, but the sun has been coming and going. And as I said, there was forecast for showers at some stage today, but hopefully that'll be towards the end of it when I'm just about down the other side of this mountain. But yeah, I think views-wise, this is pretty spectacular. Okay, talk to you later. It's 10:04. I've pretty much come up to the, I'd say almost the high point of the Ironbound Ranges, at least the section we're crossing anyway. All I could think of was this is a bit like a cartoon. You sort of think, okay, or I'm at the summit, and you get there, and then you realise you're still going up after that, the summit the real summit that's hidden behind. So at the moment, we're crossing over behind the range. We have crossed up and over. We're going along just below the summit, and we're walking along, and probably about another 100 metres looks like we go over this next ridge. And I don't know if we're walking along, but we should be starting to head down, but I'll see how we go. One thing I didn't mention in the earlier post from today, with my spoon getting stolen, I realised once I put my gear on that the magnet off my water bladder hose had also gone. God knows why. I'm guessing it's a bush rat decided it was attractive and decided to take that as well. But it would have had to work for that to get it off the hose. So interesting to see why they collect these things. Steady climb up. Just lots of breaks. I mean, I've been going for 3 hours 30 and done 3.78 kilometres. So it's very slow going, roughly just a bit over a kilometre per hour. We've just got a hiker going past. I must admit, you'll hear me say we a lot in these podcasts, and it's only because I'm travelling with another group, a group of 9, who we talked to earlier on, and we just seem to be paralleling. We're staying at the same campsite last night, night before, and we're staying at the same campsite tonight. I think after tonight, they've wanted to get over the Ironbound Ranges to avoid the really bad weather, and they're going to sort of crack it a bit more cruisy and do a bit more of the touristy stuff. They might stay in at one of the bays and just have a day's relax, whereas I'll just keep on going. So from pretty much tomorrow onwards, I'll be on my own, I'm guessing. Although there is another 2 hikers who we haven't talked to, but they've stayed at the campsite. They were the first night, they were already there when we got there. Second night, they came in later and camped by themselves. And I'm guessing we'll see them tonight as well. As I'm sitting here, I'm almost tempted to put the pack cover on and put my rain jacket on. Starting to get a slight bit of drizzle, not much, but there's a big storm or a big rain front coming in from the mountains behind us, and it looks like it's moving our direction. So if I look to my right, it's cloudy, but it's sort of this sun peeking through the clouds, whereas the left, you can actually see a rain front. So it'll be interesting to see whether it steers by or hits us, but I'll probably put the rain jacket and rain cover on just in case. Okay, I will keep on going. It's 11:27. Up on the highest point, at least that we walk over on the Ironbound Ranges, 910 metres. Just having a little short break before pretty much going down very much all the way. So there's a couple of short plateaus, but otherwise it's just pretty much a straight descent down. So it'll be interesting to see what that's like. Weather's pretty good. I thought it was going to rain and put the rain jacket on and the pack cover, but it just didn't come through, so I ended up stopping and taking the jacket off because I was getting a bit hot. Looking down over the bay and the ocean at the moment, very calm, very still, and I think weather-wise, I think we've done really well. I wouldn't have wanted to walk up that in torrential rain or in 38 degrees. It's 8:47 on Sunday the 11th of December. I'm here in my tent at Little Deadman's Bay. Today we left Louisa River campsite and climbed or ascended the Ironbound Range. All up, this trip was supposed to be roughly 12.3 kilometres. It ended up being more than that. And it was supposed to take somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. Conditions were reasonably good today. It took me 11 and a half hours all up. And I think going up was fine. It was a set of stairs. It was steep, but it was okay. Coming down on the other side was quite difficult and quite slow, just so you didn't basically injure yourself not coming the way down. So you just had to be really careful about where you put your feet. In some instances I was walking down a creek bed, but it was very muddy and very steep with lots of fallen trees. So it just took a long time. It's a bit funny. I mean, I still have a few more days to go on this trip, but so far the highlight is coming up the Ironbound Ranges and getting the views. The low light is the descent of the Ironbound Ranges. So yeah, it's a bit funny in that respect. But yeah, the photos and the images and the views are just spectacular. They really are. And I think, in all honesty, it'll end up being the image for the trip right up. Tomorrow I'll be planning on heading to Surprise Bay, which is roughly 20 kilometres. I'll see how I go. I may not get that far. But given the conditions are nowhere near what they were today, it'll be a long day still. But again, I'm just trying to make sure that I meet my bus on the 14th of December. I've basically got 3 more days, averaging 15 kilometres per day. So if I can do a long day on one of the days, it just makes the other 2 days pretty easy. It means I'm not having to rush to get to where I'm supposed to be going. All right, I think that's probably me. I am buggered, and I'm going to head off to bed. Bye for now. Now, I'll talk about in more detail after episode 241's been published about all the things that I learned on this trail. But just up front, the Ironbounds did end up being my highlight and my lowlight of this whole trip, and there was a lack of photos from the descent on the Ironbounds, and also a lack of recordings, and there's a very good reason for that, because I pretty much spent a number of hours walking down what amounted to a creek bed, a flowing creek bed, trying to go up, over and around tree falls and mudslides and steps. It was a hard slog down, it really was. But we'll talk about that more in detail in episode 242. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. That's all for me. Bye for now.